mistakes has been taken in Iraq, rather than we have a council depends on the qualification, depends also on the political parties and the rising leaders in the demonstrations. It's not an easy because the popular uprising in Syria, it's nobody knows who's who and who is actually organizing the protest. It's quite difficult. This is why it takes 8 months to have the SNC, and we're still in progress. Every day we have actually to review the people. Every day we see how different tasks, different groups of the leadership among the SNC. But at the end we have actually this solid organization which can lead to have peaceful and smooth transition in Syria. Later on, the SNC will not be responsible on any transitional period, rather than actually will open up for other groups or other political parties. It has much more representative in their groups. But this organization has only task and only goal actually to achieve the Syrian revolution, its goals, which enforce Bashar Assad to step down and to make the transition in Syria peaceful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't want to add depressing news, but I think we are in October, and October is not February or March. The world has changed considerably, and the international community doesn't exist anymore. The US is in electoral mode. Europe is in saving itself mode. Even Sarkozy is just, is running an election next year. There's no one. The only talk about the Arab League. The Arab League has always been very, very reluctant to do anything against one of its members. It only needs Saudi Arabia, which has a bit of power, but it's a very cautious regime by nature. And you talk about calls, for people to leave. The U.S. has called for President Saleh to leave a long time ago, and he sort of left, but then he came back, and he's back in the picture right now. So those calls don't really go anywhere. So I think it is really what we were talking about before. It is an internal affair, and it's going to be sort of very close to the region, which is sad but interesting as well. My question has to do with all the revolutions that have taken place so far this year. Had the military played a central role? Whether it held the departure of the dictator, whether it's split into and start fighting each other, whether it was paralyzed and eventually just, it's always the military that held the key. And what surprises me in Syria is, you mentioned defectors, both of you mentioned defections, but it's limited, still limited. And on the other hand, you have people who are committing atrocities, like full-fledged war crimes, or whatever you know to qualify them. And not only that, but those crimes are taking place not only in Syria, but even in parts of Europe, when there is intimidation of Syrian protesters. They are being bullied outside of the embassies where they protest, or wherever they protest. This is like Western capital, that what is this culture of impunity? And those who are actually doing the killing. And there's lots of footage of that. Everybody has a camera. So it's not hard to see those images of those people going in the street, just bullying the crowd, shooting at the crowd. Why is this culture of impunity? Why do you find enough people, that many people, who are they, to actually commit those atrocities? By the way, the atrocities are just really quite horrible. I mean, it's not just shooting at a crowd. It's just more personal, more physical. It looks like Chile in the 1970s.
Basically, I think, and this is where we really have to acknowledge, and where, for instance, a reference that Rضوان made to the 1950s, when we had the harmony between the different communities and confessional groups was very well known and celebrated, and we had Muslim Brotherhood working together with Protestant Christians and so on and so forth. But the reality is, we have to acknowledge that since the 50s up until now, we had 50 years of Ba'ath rule. 40 years were dominated by the Assad family, and we have a methodical indoctrination of minority groups in Syria, basically, and also of the Sunni community in Syria by different forces. And we had a lot of basically changes in terms of how we feel about the country, who we are as a people, and the issue of development also in our country have really been sort of going up and down for a while, and over the last 20 years it's been sort of like in a downturn for a long time. I think the identity of the modern Syrian is very broken. There is this vague sense of belonging to a country, but beyond that there is a lot of confusion about so many things. When you hear the regime propaganda, it's really very much reminiscent of fascist propaganda. It's as if Goebbels is speaking really to the Syrian people at this stage. But it's not to the Syrian people, it's to the minority groups. There is a lot of indoctrination, there is a lot of playing on the fear and stoking of the sectarian fires. And I think to the point where when you have a sniper with a rifle on the top of a building, he knows that's a child, he knows this is an unarmed child, and yet he's willing to shoot. I mean, you really have to wonder what kind of hatred his mind has been filled with, what kind of lies. But, when you are dealing with this kind of situation, and when you have a regime that's capable of manipulating the fears of certain segments of the populations and stoking them with hatred and filling them with lies and taking sort of several very legitimate issues about their role in society and transferring that into an element of control, into an element of manipulation, into an element of hatred, then we are really definitely facing a situation where civil war is very much a real prospect in our future. We cannot keep referring to the 1950s except as a reminder that things were better and we could probably go back there and learn a few lessons. But the realities on the ground are right now is that we are a heavily sectarian society. The Alawite, the Christians and the Jews are not thinking as Syrians at this stage, but mostly they're sectarian, or even as leftists or members of the Communist Party or Ba'ath Party or whatever. They're thinking as if their identity is the political party and is the thing that they should advocate. There is an existential crisis the regime has created, and it's been manipulated continuously, day and night, through the propaganda machine of the regime and through its agents on the ground. And I think this is really what's creating this ability of the regime to behave with impunity, because the regime doesn't give a damn about what the Syrian people in general think. It gives a damn about what the segments from which it derives its support think. And as long as they think along the lines that it wants, then this is perfect for it. So we are really dealing with realities, with a broken sense of identity, with realities that are very much paving the ground for some kind of a civil mayhem. The protesters and their leaders on the ground have been immensely wise and immensely brave and immensely intelligent in their ability to not be dragged into a sectarian conflict. For a while, 2 months ago, the regime spoke about sectarian clashes and Homs and some incidents and people getting killed and targeted. And all of a sudden, now that the tanks are in the street, we don't hear that anymore. So it seems to me these events and news were manufactured so that the regime can introduce these tanks into the city and justify the atrocities it's committing there. But the reality is, we do not see this pattern continuing. Had this been a real pattern, I think we would have been witnessing right now clashes in many different communities around Homs. We would have seen sort of like Sunnis going into an Alawite village and committing atrocities or anything along these lines. But we are not seeing that. The reality is, the protesters, even though the majority of them are Arab Sunnis, they really don't think of their revolution along these terms. They refuse to think of this revolution along these terms. And despite occasional lapses in rhetoric, and despite the fact that sectarian prejudices are real, but you have a protest movement that's trying to rise above the prejudice, that's trying to say, look, we know we have a problem, we don't necessarily are acting out of complete and sincere acceptance of the other, but we're acting out of a sense that we have no other choice. We are together. We need to find a solution to our problems. So the protest leaders so far have really been smart, savvy, moral, and ethical. But the problem is time is not on their side if they are not supported in the right way. If the international community doesn't provide support to the Free Syrian Army, doesn't provide support to the protest movement, doesn't change its current stance. What you said is very disconcerting for me. Because yes, you're right, the American government now is going into election mode. The French are going into election mode. Other EU countries are in, let's save our asses, our economy is faltering, and the Arab League cannot be counted on to do anything. So we are being left alone. This is now an internal situation, and we need to find a way to manage it until the conditions on in the international scene change and allow for a more